What if I told you that every lie ever told to you was not just an accident of language, but a strategy, not a misunderstanding, not a mistake, but a precise and calculated distortion? You've felt it, haven't you? That quiet suspicion that someone's words didn't match their eyes. That moment of confusion when the apology felt rehearsed, when the praise tasted like manipulation. That ache in your chest, not because someone hurt you, but because they made you doubt your own perception. You were not crazy. You were being spoken to in the language of a liar. And that language is fluently spoken by far more people than you want to believe. This is not just about pathological deception. This is about social survival, about how people twist words not just to hide the truth, but to control you. Every time someone said, "I'm fine," but made you feel guilty. Every time they said, "I didn't mean it that way," but left a scar anyway. Every time they insisted you're overreacting when your gut screamed that you were not. What you felt was the invisible power of psychological warfare. The kind Machiavelli didn't just understand, he predicted. Perfectly. He knew words are not for truth. They are for influence. And here's the most terrifying part. The more you trust blindly, the more fluent they become. Because every time you excuse the lie, they sharpen it. Every time you doubt yourself, they rewrite the narrative. You don't just hear their lies, you start living inside them. And somewhere along the way, you stop asking the one question that could have set you free. Why do I keep believing people who keep betraying me? Because the truth isn't just painful, it's humiliating. To admit that you were fooled, to admit that your kindness was turned against you, to admit that someone looked into your eyes and used your honesty as leverage. But what if I told you? The problem isn't just that they lie. It's that they lie in your language. They use your empathy as a strategy, your desire for peace as a manipulation tool, your moral compass as their camouflage. And that's why this video will not comfort you. It will wake you up. Because today, we are going to decode the psychology of deceit. Not just what they say, but why it works on you. Why the liars always seem charming. Why you explain their behavior to yourself at 2 a.m. Why you still feel guilty for walking away. This isn't about learning to lie back. It's about never falling under their spell again. Because here's the first truth. The most dangerous lie is not the one they tell you. It's the one you tell yourself. To keep believing them. And what if everything you've been taught about good intentions, second chances, and forgiveness wasn't wisdom at all? What if it was just conditioning? The one who deceives will always find those who allow themselves to be deceived. Niccolò Machiavelli. You didn't just believe them. You explained their lies to yourself. You gave them context, excuses, grace. You said, they had a rough childhood. They didn't mean to hurt me. They just don't know how to love. But deep down, you knew. You knew that something was off when their apology sounded like a performance. You knew it when they repeated the same betrayal, only softer, smarter. You knew it when your own body flinched at their name, even while your mind defended them. That wasn't love. That was emotional fraud, because they didn't just lie with words, they lied with identity. They presented a self that never existed. They mirrored your values, your dreams, your empathy, and used them like tools. And the cost? It wasn't just a broken heart. It was your reality that shattered. You stopped trusting your gut. You stopped speaking up. You shrank, quietly, strategically, so they wouldn't find a new reason to twist the knife. This is not weakness. This is trauma disguised as tolerance. You became so skilled at decoding their behavior that you forgot to notice your own silence. Do you even remember who you were before you started explaining everything away? Because the lie didn't just live in their words, it rooted itself in you. Now you don't just doubt others, you doubt yourself. You don't ask for clarity because you've learned. Clarity is dangerous. It ends illusions. So you settle for confusion because at least it buys you the fantasy that maybe one day they'll finally tell the truth, but they won't. Because this was never about miscommunication, it was about control. And you became fluent in their manipulation tactics, even while your soul screamed, "This is not okay." Still, you stayed. Why? Because you were taught, by culture, family, and false moralism, that leaving is betrayal, that to endure dishonesty with patience is somehow holy, that to expose someone's cruelty is worse than enduring it silently. And that is how the lie metastasizes. It rewrites your virtue. It teaches you to confuse betrayal with forgiveness, deception with love, manipulation with meaning. But here's the truth you've been avoiding. The lie didn't just change how you see them, it changed how you see yourself. You're no longer the person you once were, not because you grew, but because you collapsed. Quietly, elegantly, invisibly, but not anymore, because now you're seeing the cost. Not just in pain, but in lost years, distorted reality, and a self that has learned to smile while bleeding. And that is not noble. It's tragic. He who seeks to deceive will always find someone who will allow himself to be deceived. Niccolò Machiavelli. Let's drop the veil. They weren't confusing. They were calculated. You weren't reading too much into things. You were decoding a language they speak fluently, the language of liars. And now, it's time you learn to speak it too. Not to use it, but to recognize it before it wraps itself around your throat. Because deception isn't always loud. It often sounds like, "I would never hurt you." It often looks like concern, smells like loyalty, and tastes like sweet contradiction. Liars don't deny the truth. They distort it, just enough to make you question yourself. They'll call you too sensitive when your intuition catches a micro-expression. They'll forget the details you remember vividly. They'll joke about serious things until you laugh, and now they have proof you agreed. And when you finally confront them, watch their face. They won't defend themselves. They'll dissect your tone. Suddenly, it's not about what they did. It's about how you asked. This is not a miscommunication. It's a maneuver. Because they know the battlefield, your empathy, and the weapon, their plausible deniability. They'll say, "I never said that. You're twisting my words. You're imagining things." But pay attention. It's not that they don't remember. It's that they want you to forget. Because here's the Machiavellian brilliance. The best lie is the one they make you tell yourself. They don't need to convince you they're honest. They just need to confuse you long enough for you to doubt your own clarity. And when that happens, you're theirs. Because now, every time you sense something off, you second guess it. You apologize before asking questions. You soften your truth to avoid hurting the person who's already hurting you. They don't steal your trust. They make you hand it over for the sake of peace or hope or history. And the longer you stay, the more fluent you become in their language. The "I'm sorry you feel that way" apology. The "Why are you bringing up the past?" shut down. The "You always overreact" gaslight. They don't need to scream. They just shift the spotlight until you look like the problem. But this part is where everything begins to reverse, because now you're learning the dialect. You're noticing the delayed response, the rehearsed empathy, the compliment wrapped in correction. You're watching how they spin silence into guilt, how they weaponize your integrity against you, and suddenly their words don't hypnotize you anymore. They reveal them, not as broken, not as victims, but as strategic actors in a game you were never supposed to win. Until now. Because the moment you start to see the code, the moment their charm starts to sound hollow, the moment their "I love you" feels more like a leash than a gift, that's the beginning of the end, not of you, of the spell. The greatest deception men suffer is from their own opinions. Leonardo da Vinci. You think you're angry at them for the lies, the manipulation, the twisted half-truths that gutted you when you weren't looking. But that's not the whole story, is it? Because beneath that anger is something far more devastating: humiliation. Not just that they fooled you, but that somehow you helped them do it. You took their silence and called it emotional depth. You took their vagueness and said, "They're just mysterious." You took their emotional detachment and whispered, "They've been through so much, they're just protecting themselves." You projected wisdom onto avoidance, pain onto manipulation, nobility onto deception. But how could you have known? Here's how. You were raised in a world that taught you to betray yourself, politely. When your body said, "I feel unsafe," they said, "Don't be dramatic." When your gut whispered, "Something's off," they said, "Be more understanding." When your instincts screamed, "This doesn't feel right," they told you, "You're overreacting." So you learned the most devastating lesson of all, to silence yourself louder than anyone else could. And that silence? It became the breeding ground for every liar who found you, because here's what they sense: that you're more afraid of being rude than being deceived, more afraid of losing them than losing yourself, more afraid of confrontation than of slow, quiet betrayal. And it didn't happen overnight. It was shaped in you, systematically, through school systems that rewarded obedience, through religion that taught forgiveness before discernment, through families that smiled through betrayal and called it maturity. So when someone lies to you, your brain doesn't yell, "Run." It whispers, "Maybe they're hurting." It tells you, "Give them time." It makes you apologize for noticing the lie at all. And slowly, you begin to need the lie, because the truth demands something you've been taught to avoid your whole life: action, boundaries, discomfort, self-trust. And so you stay, long after the truth has knocked on every door of your psyche. You stay because lies are familiar, lies feel like love, because they've always come dressed in charm and promises. Lies feel safe, because you were never taught how to sit with the storm of truth. But now you're waking up, and it hurts, because the real betrayal wasn't their lie. It was the script that made you believe the lie was love. And now, something ancient in you is rising. Rage, not just at them, but at every moment you were told to ignore what you knew in your bones. This isn't weakness. This was programming. And now you see the terrifying part. It worked. But if it was written in you, it can be rewritten. That begins when you stop just surviving lies and start recognizing the pattern of why they keep finding you. It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. Niccolò Machiavelli. You don't need closure, you need clarity. And the cold steel of strategy. You've spent years negotiating with manipulators like they were diplomats. Now finally, you see them for what they are: operators, not wounded innocents, not misunderstood souls, but players in a game they hoped you'd never learn how to play. But now, you're learning. Not to attack, but to position, not to scream, but to strike internally. And here's the first truth. You never needed their apology. You needed your power back. Because when a liar controls the narrative, they control you. But when you go silent, not from hurt, but from understanding, they lose their weapon, your reaction. This is not about becoming bitter. This is about becoming inconvenient. You stop being the person who explains their pain. You start being the person who costs them control. They once fed on your need for peace. Now, your unpredictability threatens their illusion. You're no longer the confessional booth they visit when guilt needs a place to rest. You're the locked door, and Machiavelli was clear. Power belongs not to the loud, but to the unreadable. Your new strategy is simple. You don't correct their version of the story. Let them talk. You'll win through absence. You don't beg for understanding. You act and let others adjust their perceptions later, if at all. You don't dismantle the lie. You outlive it, because the liar only exists in power as long as you stay in dialogue. Cut the channel, and the performance collapses. And here's what they fear most: your shift from audience to architect. When you start building in silence, not walls, but options, you become someone they can no longer calculate. You don't fight them. You evolve past them, not to rise above, but to position yourself outside their reach. Let them chase apologies in your absence. Let them sell a story without your signature, because your new presence isn't soft, it's strategic, not passive, composed. This isn't healing. This is realignment. Where you once sought harmony, now you study leverage. Where you once sought connection, now you observe utility. You don't ghost them because you're broken. You disappear because you've outplayed them, and that's what they never saw coming. Because while they were busy playing the victim to preserve power, you were building sovereignty in silence. And when you re-emerge, you don't ask for your place back. You build a world where they are no longer required. A wise man ought always to follow the paths beaten by great men and to imitate those who have been supreme. Niccolò Machiavelli. Now that you've seen the game for what it is, the masks, the manipulations, the emotional stagecraft, you are left with a single question: what do I do now? This is the part where people usually collapse back into performance. They retreat into the comfort of interpretation, trying to make meaning out of deception instead of power out of clarity. But you're no longer a performer in someone else's theater. You are the one who saw through the curtain, the one who realized the applause was hollow and the script was rigged. And now, you don't owe anyone your softness, not until they've earned your presence with truth. Because from this moment on, your strategy must match your intelligence. It is not enough to be aware. You must become unreachable to those who trade in illusions. This is where Machiavelli's wisdom becomes your weapon. You do not confront the liar directly. You undermine their leverage. You do not debate. You disengage. You do not explain your absence. You let them feel it. The manipulator thrives not because you are weak, but because you are predictable. They know what to say, how to provoke, how to bait you into justifying yourself. But when you change your pattern, when you respond with indifference, with silence, with sovereign distance, they have nothing to grip. Let them throw their drama into an empty room. From now on, you do not rush to respond. You do not soothe other people's discomfort with your clarity. You do not lower your standards to maintain connection. You do not give trust by default. Trust is no longer the starting point. It is the reward. You must become strategic with your presence. Let your unpredictability be your protection. Let your distance become discipline. Let your silence become signal. This is not about becoming cruel. It's about no longer playing the fool. You will begin to notice what you previously explained away, how they used confusion as camouflage, how their apologies only came when they feared your exit, how your empathy was their favorite tool, not because it helped them grow, but because it made you easier to disarm. Now, that tool is gone, And here's the Machiavellian paradox. When you stop trying to be perceived as good, you finally become powerful, not because you've turned cold, but because you've stopped being available for manipulation. And yes, you will lose people, but what you lose in approval, you will gain in inner territory. You will feel the return of something you didn't even know you had abandoned. Command. Over your time, over your boundaries, over your narrative. You do not need to explain the transformation. Let your silence say everything. You are no longer here to convince anyone of your worth. You are here to protect it. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. Niccolò Machiavelli. You are no longer the version of yourself that begged to be believed. You have returned, not as a performance, but as a presence. No longer reacting, no longer adjusting, no longer defending against people who were never seeking truth, only control. And now that you have seen behind the mask, not just theirs, but your own, you walk differently. Not heavier, not bitter, but exact. Because once you've seen how cheaply your trust was purchased, once you've tasted the hollow sweetness of a lie that called itself love, you begin to move from something far deeper than politeness. You begin to move from command. This is not the return of your old self. That self was sculpted by illusion, shaped by survival. This is your first appearance, without a script. You no longer play the agreeable one. You no longer narrate your pain for those who feed off your vulnerability. You no longer explain why you disappeared. You simply stop translating your truth into a language meant to comfort liars. And now, your absence speaks more loudly than your presence ever did. You no longer need to be chosen because you've already chosen yourself. And here is the final truth. You will not always be understood. Some will call you cold, arrogant, selfish. Let them. Their confusion is the echo of the power you reclaimed. Because for the first time, you are not adjusting your clarity for their comfort. You are not bleeding to keep a false peace. You are not reacting like a pawn in their game. You've left the board entirely. You are sovereign now, not flawless, but untouchable to those who seek to dismantle you from within. And that is what they never expected, that you would not only survive their lie, but become untouchable because of it. So let them wonder what happened to you. Let them spin stories in your silence. Let them taste the distance they once took for granted. Because you are no longer available for manipulation, performance, or emotional entrapment. You are not cruel. You are consequential. And from this point forward, every room you enter, every choice you make will be shaped not by fear, but by presence. Welcome home. You have returned. If this spoke to you, then say so. Leave a comment, even if it's just one word. Because the moment you write it, you're not just reacting, you're marking this moment as a line, as a choice, as a refusal to go back to who you were before you heard this. To stay silent is to continue living by the lie. If you're done with that, speak. And if this video helped you see something you couldn't unsee, like it, subscribe, stay, because we're only just beginning.